Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ben, and I'll be your moderator today. Thank you all for taking the time to join us for today's webinar, Better Built Integrations. Before we begin, a couple housekeeping items. Feel free to submit questions anytime using the Q&A panel. We'll be monitoring these questions throughout the webinar and answer as we go. We'll also reserve time near the end for an open Q&A. If we don't get to your question today, we'll be happy to follow up with you afterwards. This webinar will have 2 poll questions. Please use your phone to participate, as this will be via QR code. To all registered, we will email you a direct link to this webinar recording soon. With that said, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. First up is David Moseychuk, Account Executive and Business Development Manager at SavvySource. We also have Larry Pantis, Founder and CEO of SavvySource, joining us. We're also joined with Hyland's very own John Stack. Brendan won't be joining us today, but John will be taking lead here. John is a digital partner manager at Hyland who works closely with partners, delivering Hyland solutions and helpful integration strategies. So without further ado, David, please take it away.
Thanks, Ben. Really appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to talk here. Before we dive in, just want to clarify a little bit about what we'll be covering here today. It's not a technical webinar on how to use APIs, webhooks, WebSockets, or other mechanics of moving data between systems. We work with those tools every day, and we understand that getting 2 systems to communicate isn't usually the challenge. The challenge is making sure those communications understand how the business works. Over the years, we've learned integrations take discipline, clear logic, a defined methodology, and a measured approach to successful implementations that are actually useful for the organization. And the numbers on the screen really help show why that matters. More than half of IT projects today aren't delivered on time. And the issues that we find are not just the connections themselves. It comes down to discovering the business rules, inconsistent data, legacy constraints, process gaps, and exceptions that those integrations don't account for. And then there's the long-term cost. Organizations can spend the majority of their IT capacity maintaining custom integrations instead of actually innovating and helping the business move forward. And that happens when integrations are fragile or require people to continually step in and correct them. And then when poor quality data moves between systems, it reaches accounting, operations, reporting, customer service, and ultimately the decisions leadership is making. And that's costing organizations poorly utilized time and revenue. So in today's age, we understand AI, APIs, pre-built connectors, and automation platforms are becoming more capable and moving more faster than ever, which is good news. But it makes the underlying business logic and understanding that logic much more important, not less. A faster tool can move information more quickly, but doesn't determine whether the rules are complete, whether data should be trusted, and typically they don't understand the workflow properly. When those questions are addressed during the design, the cost appears later as delays, maintenance for the integrations, rework, and manual cleanup. And that's how people end up getting stuck in the middle, compensating for what the integration was never designed to understand. Let's move into what we're going to cover today. We're going to start with why manual happens, where basic connections often fall short in complex business environments. Then we'll look at an actual workflow that's happening today with one of our customers, and we'll use it as a grounding example to help bring the methodology we're going to talk to into reality. After that, I'll pass things over to John from Hyland to talk about their integrations and capabilities. And then we'll recap, go over what we discussed, and then move into a Q&A. It gives you a high-level overview of where we're going. Before we start, I want to throw up a quick survey here. So use your phones to scan the QR code and think about your organization today. Where are your people still managing data manually, moving it, fixing errors, and why is that happening? Are they doing it to re-enter information from your dispatch into your ERP? Or, they're trying to reconcile your payroll. So think about that and take a minute to respond here. And we'll give you guys about 30 seconds here to get a feel of the room and see what's going on out there in the real world. Personally, being the sales arm at Savvy Source, we use smaller systems because we're a intimate partner for customers, and so we don't use enterprise grade CRM. And so because of that, I'm constantly re-entering information from Outlook into my CRM to have good notes there. But going to vary from organization to organization. Looks like common occurrence from the audience. There's people re-entering information. Verifying accuracy is very critical. It's important for making decisions down the ride. All right. So we'll try wrapping things up here. Our systems aren't connected. That's a very common thing we run into these days. It's changing, but it's still common. So why is manual happening? From the outside, manual work is easy to criticize. Now, I think back to a recent visit we had with a prospect. This was a specialized general contractor, and their team was still printing paperwork to resolve issues. They were manually managing parts of payroll and, constantly trying to get an accurate P&L statement. So when we left, it was difficult for me to understand why so many manual steps were happening. But we dug deeper, and the reason became abundantly clear. Their information was spread across different systems, and rules weren't being consistently applied. Supporting details were difficult to find, and the team didn't trust the numbers. They didn't trust them enough as they were to make decisions on them. They were manually taking action to make sure the data was accurate. So it wasn't because people preferred paper or were resistant to technology. They had great systems, digital processes, but it was happening because someone still had to answer questions. Is this correct? Was this transaction complete? Can we trust data enough to move forward and act on the data? So manual work often exists as a control point. People step into the process because systems don't understand the business context, and they're not designed to make reliable decisions you can trust. And that leads into our next slide. Simple connections don't always work. We live in a connected world. I can pull up my thermostat on my phone, change the temperature, see runtime. I can even get the kilowatt hours my water heater has consumed over the past week. So great accessibility, but why is connecting business systems still such a challenge? Why do basic connections fall short? And the difference is, my thermostat, it's performing a relatively narrow task. It's collecting known information, following defined rules, and it's presenting it back to me. And business processes are rarely that clean. A transaction at a business may depend on information from several systems, supporting documents, pricing agreements, approval rules, tolerances and decisions that change depending on the situation. And a simple connection can only move data from one system to another, but it doesn't know whether that data is correct, whether the transaction is complete, and whether the supporting proof is present. That's why getting systems to communicate is only the first step. The harder part is designing the connection so it understands enough of the business process to move the right information at the right time to the right place. And I alluded to it in the previous slide. The real world is messy. The clean path is rarely the difficult part of integrations. A clean set of data can help you move from proof of concept to a working progress integration. But real operations introduce variation. Documents arrive late, names differ between systems, quantities fall outside of tolerances, records are being duplicated somewhere, there's no source of truth, and all that determines whether the workflow actually holds up. A weak integration is going to pass the uncertainty to people. They lose trust in it, and they start doing things manually. A strong integration identifies those issues, contains them, and gives the business a clear way to resolve it. That's why usually the final portion is what requires the most thought in an integration build. So I want to introduce the Pareto principle. The Pareto principle is an idea introduced by an economist back in the 1900s. And I think it relates perfectly here for our situation and what we found in our experience. The first 80% of a project that we engage on when building an integration really only takes us 20% of the effort. It's moving from proof of concept to reality. But then that last 20% of getting it workable, that's where 80% of our time ends up at. And it takes hard work to get through those. You have to work through the edge cases. You have to understand the business logic. You have to include proof if it's required. How are exceptions being handled? To whom do they go? All these things have to be figured out, designed, and built into the integration. And so let's take a look at a real workflow we can follow. And I think this is something relatable for many of us out there. And what it'll help us do is make our methodology practical. We're going to use the workflow to explain how integrations fit into the bigger picture, and why those integrations are critical for that workflow actually being effective in the real world. AP is useful because it fits into a bigger process. An invoice rarely stands on its own, and moving an invoice into an accounting system is only part of the step. But before the business can approve that invoice, they have to understand, what is the product or service actually delivered? Is there supporting proof required, and where is it? Do the quantities and pricing match? Is the transaction or the invoice tied to the correct vendor, location, item, job, and account? And these are questions that show up in the integrations, timing how data moves, when it moves, the business logic, the source of truth. So integrations are a component of the workflow, but they're very critical in ensuring that the workflow works. They determine how information moves, when it moves, and which records are trusted. What happens when something doesn't align? So the challenge is not simply moving an invoice into accounting. It's coordinating the documents, the records, the business rules, and the financial data well enough to determine whether the transaction can move forward. For our grounding example, we're going to look at an actual workflow at a ready mix producer who's receiving and paying for raw material deliveries. So for context, this is a multi-site ready mix producer. They've got over 30 locations, and raw materials are being delivered daily at various times. It's a busy operation. Things are moving in and out all over the place. At a high level, the AP process is straightforward. All the accounts payable team is confirming the charge and posting them for payment. But underneath that, there's complexity that's got to be considered. They have to confirm what's delivered, where it was delivered, how it was received, who was involved, what hauler brought it in, whether the correct pricing agreement's been applied, and getting all that to coordinate and flow across 30 different locations with a high volume. Small inconsistencies quickly compound and become big issues. So I think that's what makes this example useful. And while the process looks simple on the outside, we'll get to the underneath of the process and see how it works with the integration. So to understand the components here, we've got 4 major components. Each one owns a different path of the transaction. The documents supplying the proof and record of information from outside the company. Command Cloud, the operational record of what's going on here, manages inventory. It's where the work happens for the business. Acumatica is an ERP system. It has the financial record. It's where validated invoices ultimately end up being coded and posted. And then OnBase is the underlying workflow engine and integration tool. It's what brings all these pieces together and connects them. It's managing the documents from different sources. But in this entire process, no single system owns everything. Each piece has a defined responsibility, and the entire workflow, depends on those responsibilities being clear. So OnBase, acting as an integration engine, coordinates how those systems work and records work together. So the business doesn't have to manually reconstruct the transaction every single time.
David, we got a question real quick. How should exceptions be handled within an integration? Should every possible scenario be automated, or should the solution include a process for other users to review and resolve certain exceptions?
I actually get into that a bit more later on in the methodology, so I'll answer that when I get to that slide. But high level, it's going to depend on the situations. So if you can remind me when we get to our exception slide, I'll answer it then. Before we get into methodology, let's take a quick poll here. What workflow is regularly causing frustration or rework for your team? Are you hearing from your team members, I spend way too much time on this process? Isn't there an easier way? So scan the QR code, throw in some responses here. Let's see what's a commonality here. And you can choose your own options here. I threw in some options there to jog people's minds, give them some ideas. John, what's something you do that you're always frustrated with because it still seems manual at an organization your size?
Far too many things, we'll put it that way. I think you called out a really good one relative to update of information between systems. I have integrations between my Outlook and my Salesforce solution. I have integrations between other line of business systems to help cut down on that. But it's certainly those in between areas where we haven't caught, planned, made a bridge to ensure that we're cutting down on that manual keying, manual entry, duplicate entry. Shall we say, because they're the exception, not the rule. It's definitely something that, whether it's a company of our size that's over $1 billion or groups that are smaller, it's something that you can only tackle so many things and so much time. But yeah, we've certainly covered 80-90% of those common processes, common flows. But yeah, there's still a couple things in between, and that shall we say still could be addressed, and we use different tools, whether it's integrations between systems, AI tools, or otherwise to try to fill in those gaps. So
yeah, so it's obvious to see that there's we can all relate to being frustrated with what seems like sometimes pointless work, and so that's typically actually where we start. When we're getting involved into building integration and orchestrating a bigger workflow process, we want to start with the work that's happening today. The reason why we do that is when we're trying to understand what's happening today, it's going beyond the surface level tasks. When we're asking, why do they enter these invoices or review these documents? How are they approving these transactions? We're trying to understand the logic behind that. What are people checking before an invoice moves into process? If they're printing out paperwork, why are they doing that? What's driving that desire to print the paperwork out? What are they fixing when systems don't agree? What decisions have to happen when there is an exception? Who does it have to go to? All these questions got to be asked to try to uncover the business logic. There's a lot of times we find in our experiences that you ask these questions, and oftentimes people redirect you to one particular person. So that person has this business knowledge and workflow that isn't shared. So we start by studying the work to try to figure out the business logic and the exact steps that have to happen. Once we understand that, now we start mapping those rules. We figure out what parts of the process can be replicated with a code integration. You know, if someone's checking an invoice against a BOL, what exactly needs to match? That's something that can be replicated with an integration or a workflow. So mapping the rules gets the logic out of individual memory. It helps define clear enough for the workflow and for the rest of the team what to follow consistently. And this is also where the source of truth becomes important. So an integration is looking at different systems and passing data between them. It needs to know which system or document is trusted for each part of the transaction. So thinking about our example, Acumatica is the ERP, Command Cloud is the operations side. The integration is not going to rely on Acumatica to dictate this load went out to this truck. It doesn't know that information. Command Cloud does. So the integration is relying on Command Cloud for the operational data, whereas it understands and knows that the invoice that's being coded has to live inside the ERP. So for our producer, those rules account for the BOL, the delivery location, which specific hauler, material, and pricing agreements have to be referenced. And each one of those affects how the invoice matches and whether it should move forward or stop for review. That quickly transitions us to exceptions. For the most part, when we build integrations, we consider exceptions a critical component of that. We know that there's going to be issues and rework required. So we're not designing the integration to move everything over cleanly. There's stuff that requires human judgment. And sometimes the business logic, oftentimes the business logic dictates how those exceptions are handled. And what's happening with this exception workflow is we're moving people from touching every single document to only touching and focusing on the stuff that needs their attention. And this is where we see most of the gains in efficiency, is allowing humans and people to move beyond the busy work and use their skills and skill set for stuff that actually matters for the business. Once you've designed the integration, or once you've understood the work, mapped out the rules, and you've built an exception flow workflow queue, you can start testing the integration against reality. And that's where you understand whether or not the integration is going to hold up in your environment. Clean data helps you move from concept to reality, but the dirty data, the edge cases, is where the real testing happens. So what happens when the BOL is missing? What happens when the invoice shows up twice? What if the quantity is close between the BOL and the invoice? Is there a tolerance that's acceptable? What happens when the wrong plant or material are attached to a transaction? These are scenarios that usually create manual work today, and the integration has to account for that. The goal is not to prove the happy path or the easy path. It's to prove that the workflow can handle the messy stuff, the edge cases, and thereby prove that people can trust that integration. Because if the edge cases aren't handled well, people go right back to moving and checking things manually. And it's not because they're resisting the system, it's because they don't trust it anymore. So that's a critical component of any integration we build. We understand what's going on, and we build it so that the people that are using it actually trust it to do the work they need to do. So thinking about our producer and their particular integration and workflow, because of the way the integrations work within that workflow, 93% of their invoices and documents, supporting documents, are passing straight through. That's a huge win for them. When we first implemented this, it was saving them over 100 hours a week. For an AP team, for this size, that's an incredible labor savings. And if you think about it, this was well over 5 years ago. Their business has quadrupled in annual revenue since then. And with that quadrupling, volume of material delivered has significantly increased. If this was still being done manually, just think about the amount of time it would have taken their team to handle the stuff as they did in the past. So the integrations didn't just make the existing process faster. It gave the business the capacity to scale without adding administrative overhead at the same rate.
David, we got a good one here. A lot of business leaders like to ask this, but at what point does it actually make financial sense to automate a process instead of continuing to have, hiring someone to do it manually? Could you speak on that?
I mean, the previous slide actually answers that pretty well. The objective for the business was to grow and scale efficiently. They knew they couldn't continue doing this manually. So considering future goals and direction for the company and the business really dictates whether it's sustainable to do it manually or automate, build an integration. At a certain point, you're going to hit a breaking point where it just the mistakes, the duplication efforts, the turnover because having to do manual monotonous work is very degrading for people. All that starts to add up, and it's no longer sustainable. So there's a break-even point as businesses scale where automation and integrations really deliver value.
I'll just add to that, David, relative to the, shall we say, financial equation for that situation. Much like David has discussed, when understanding a current business process, the logic, the challenges, the what needs to take place to execute and have straight through processing or an exception that needs to be reviewed by a human. We also recommend and advise and what we would call value consulting, which is helping and aiding with that exact financial justification question. So understanding that the current state today involves X number of documents, X number of processes, X number of people, X number of hours, which has a quantifiable amount of cost of people and time and in other cases it's either rework or missing deliveries or whatever the case may be, and then comparing that to the cost of automating that solution. That could be an integration, that could be a workflow process or many, that can be intelligent document processing, all of the above, to recognize that weighted analysis of, does it make sense to continue with having a person address this solution by adding headcount, by increasing that manual effort, or automating that process? And many times the answer is automation. And the reason being is, with technology, you usually can get quicker, more accurate results than a human for less of a cost. Does that mean that the technology can do everything? Absolutely not. It's certainly something where there is a value to human for that knowledge work, for those exceptions, for those things that are outside of the norm. You don't replace them, you just enable them better. You allow the busy work or monotonous tasks to be tackled by a technology engine because it understands those consistent use cases, and allow a knowledge worker to leverage their expertise when it comes to the exceptions to the rule. So
that's right, John. Well, I'm glad you jumped in because this is actually a good point to pass things off to you. So we've covered the workflow design, and now I want to give it to you to talk about how to accelerate the integration process, where existing integrations can help with that. So I'll pass this off to you.
Yeah, sounds great. Appreciate it. So really, a couple of things that I'm going to touch on as we go through here, and Have no fear to the attendees. Mine is a little less slides and less information than David, so we won't keep you too long today. But certainly want to talk a little bit about why integrations matter, why it is a benefit to leverage that ability to communicate between systems and help those users be more effective, and certainly a little bit about the real world. Some of our clients, the value that they see, do have a specific note about a current client and the journey that they went through, things of that nature. So certainly want to offer a little illumination on what can be done and how. So with that, move on to the next one. So, really when it comes to integrations, I'll steal a line from Jerry Maguire. Let's see if I can get the right word. You complete me. You complete me. For anyone that remembers that movie, that's really what we're talking about with integrations is being able to complete that process, complete that unification of data and systems and logic to allow a user to be as effective as possible. If they are bouncing between systems, if they are seeking information instead of executing results, it affects their efficiency. It affects the ability to drive revenue or collect money or whatever the case may be. So it really is about bringing that together and completing the solution as opposed to having it fragmented. So next one, David. So as we look at that, some of the reasons why our customers have really taken advantage of this is a couple reasons. One, looking at the challenges that are created. If systems are not aligned, if they are not consistent, that causes more exceptions than you should have. It's a situation that it's actually creating more challenges instead of solving them. So it is best to allow that data, that content, that information to flow freely to ensure continuity between those. And then the cost associated to it. We touched on it a little bit in the earlier slide, but relative to the people, the man hours, the time, the delays, the collection of money, all of those have hard costs associated to it, which are things that we can help identify and calculate. But then there's also the soft cost, the situation of as we look at some of our processes and how it impacts our customers' customers. So the folks that are online today, obviously, from diverse industries and developing products and ready mix providers, things of that nature. You're not the end user. You have your own end users that you need to collaborate with, work, satisfy their needs, and that's really one of the hidden costs is allowing you to do that more effectively and ensure that customer satisfaction, just as we're here to help our clients do better. And then really, those connected systems will create better outcomes. So it can be better outcomes for the users. It can be better outcomes for your customers, and allowing you to be most effective at what you're trying to accomplish. So with that, you do have a couple different options relative to integrations. Whenever possible, we're of course going to recommend leveraging one of our purpose-built integrations. So when you look at a purpose-built integration, that is where we have one of our Hyland platforms, Hyland solutions, that we're interfacing with another line of business system that has a footprint sizable enough to create this as a programmatic connectivity. So it's something that's developed by our research and development team that's built into the platform. It is allows the capability to configure, design, and release that integration in a more timely manner, being able to take advantage, being able to prevent against failures on upgrades and things of that nature. But that's not necessarily the right choice in all instances. Even when we have a purpose-built integration, there are times where custom integration is a better fit. That can be a scenario where we don't have a connector for that system. So we have a few different options that allow for not only system to system, but UI interface integrations that can be designed and tailored more specifically to a customer's business needs. So it's something that has a little more flexibility, has a little more customization. So there's no right or wrong answer because they will typically vary with our clients. I have some clients that leverage both. It's a scenario where there's a couple purpose-built integrations that make sense for them because it matched so well with their line of business systems and processes today. And then alternatively, there's a couple other ones where we either didn't have an integration or it just didn't meet their needs quite right. And we have that flexibility to help them solve for, because realistically, making sure that we can cut down on those inefficiencies is really a very important metric, a very important need. With our customers in the real world, dealing with us every day, time is money. And it's something where, if they cannot accomplish what they need to, it costs them. It impacts them in some way, shape, or form. So one of the examples I wanted to share with you is a group that's been with us for over a decade now, Access International. They're based up in Montreal. Great group, transportation logistics. So similar to a lot of folks online today that have to deal with shipping manifest and product reconciliation, things of that nature, to ensure that they are aligned. So whether it is their documentation for customs information or invoicing or requirements, certainly things that I know a lot of folks that deal with supply management, supply chain have to handle, have to address. So they start off really with conversion into a content management world, making sure that they have the right structure wrappers around their documentation, their files, making sure it was easy for their users to get into the system and address. But then after that, taking that step further to work with in between systems, integrating the information so that it allowed for connected processes, making sure that they could easily take advantage and have insight to what they need to do their jobs. One of the notes that we have on here is from one of their IT leaders just talking about how it's able to adapt to their business needs and their processes and not the other way around. It's a scenario where we are a configurable platform. So it's something that it's not a point solution. It's not a required delivery. So in other words, if we have an idea on how to do something, we're happy to share it and give you best practices, but you're not locked into that particular solution. You can adjust it accordingly to make sure it meets your needs. And all of that said, what it does is create those efficiencies. Takes away those hidden costs of people searching, because I think the current metric is between 20 and 30% of an end user's day is spent searching for information instead of having it presented to them. So time is money. That is something that we're always looking to tackle. And if I can steal from Jerry Maguire again, we'll go with the show me the money. It's something where our leaders, whether it's a CFO, if it's a CEO or COO, the leadership team understands and recognizes that sometimes you have to spend money to make money. Other times it's a matter of recognizing your inefficiencies to save and to be more efficient, more effective, and more impactful. Just a handful of the purpose-built integrations that we have today. I want to say we're roughly around 70 or so. I just listed a couple just to give some general ideas. In the ERP world, you have a Workday and SAP and JD Edwards. CRM world, you have a Salesforce with human resources systems. There's SuccessFactors, there's Workday, there's PeopleSoft. We have Microsoft integrations for those that are using your Office suite of products or Outlook or otherwise. So needless to say, there's a lot of options and a lot of the consistent common platforms that we see out there in the world. But no, if it is not on that list, we have another 500 or so integrations that have been delivered by our customers to other line of business systems. So definitely a much larger customizable list of integrations as opposed to the ones that are purpose-built. But regardless, the answer is we can help solve for those problems. We can tailor the process to meet your business needs, your business practices. So that's that. Help me help you. It's a scenario where we don't know what we don't know. It's not something that we can, shall we say, solve everyone's problems without understanding the underlying needs. So one thing I always recommend to folks is if you have concerns, if you have questions, get them out there. If it's something where you recognize that you have a potential problem, reach out to David, reach out to Larry, reach out to Ben. Let's schedule some time, talk about what you're going through, and we can share anecdotally what we've done for other clients, what we've done for other line of business systems, what we've done for other people to ensure that they're in a better place when we are done with our project. So appreciate that. Thanks for the time, and I'll pass it back to you, David.
Thanks, John. Much appreciated. Some good coverage there. So we got a good example of what good technology can deliver, how that helps integrations do more and be better, and how that helps organizations deliver real value and move faster. Technology and integrations, their capacity and capability is only part of the equation. Workflow still has to reflect how the business operates, needs clear rules, reliable data source, defined validation points, and a way to handle exceptions without pushing the work back onto people. So that's where better integrations can help deliver better workflows and better outcomes. The technology creates the capability. The workflow determines whether that capability produces results the business can trust. And so as we bring everything together, let's recap what we've covered, where we've gone. We know manual work happens for a reason. It's there to usually as a fail-safe. People step into the process because they're checking accuracy, completeness, and whether information can be trusted. We then looked at why basic connectors aren't always enough. Moving data between systems is only part of the job. And then we talked about a specific, stronger design, starting with the work that people are doing today, why that's important, mapping the rules that happen around that work, validating transactions, and designing a clean path and an exception path, where that exception path presents the issues with the context to make accurate decisions. The workflow has to understand the rules, proof, source of truth decisions, and what conditions determine whether something can move forward. We saw why exceptions matter so much. We saw why clean transactions should move through and not require someone to touch them. So to recap, Hyland's integrations can accelerate that work by giving you a stronger starting point, reducing unnecessary implementation complexity. And when those capabilities are combined with well-understood workflows, the results are not just connected systems. It's impactful business outcomes, real results for the people doing the work day after day. Less rework, less manual reconciliation, faster processing, and confidence in the information moving through the organization. So if you take back one thing to your organization, it's this. Don't start by asking what systems we should integrate. What should we connect? Start by asking, where are my people repeatedly checking, fixing, matching, or holding work up because they don't trust the process? And that's where the real opportunity is. So these are steps that take time. They're not easy to go through, but they're the control points in your organization. That's where people are protecting the business from incomplete data, missing proof, duplicate records, bad coding, and decisions that shouldn't move forward automatically. To help with that process, we have put together a worksheet that gives a clear structure for mapping the process. It's a document that helps you establish where work is happening, what systems are involved, what rules are being applied, where information comes from, and what causes exceptions. What do people do with those exceptions to make decisions? This helps create a practical foundation for evaluating integration architecture and design. It's going to help you consider technology, which is the right approach for you. And instead of trying to force your process into particular technology, you can understand from the get-go, hey, this is not going to work for us. Once you understand your work, you can design better rules, establish stronger validation, cleaner exception paths, and use the integrations that you might already have available. At the end of the day, the best integrations do more than connect systems. They give you the confidence that you need in your systems and data. With that, Ben, I'll hand it off to you.
Hey, thanks a lot, David. And thank you all, John, David, so far for a great discussion. Yeah, let's jump into some Q&A while we let some of those come in. I think we got coming in right now. Yeah, sure. How important are standard operating procedures when building integration solutions? What if the process isn't standardized or documented, and only one person really knows how it works and how to solve issues? Um, David, do you have anything to speak on what this was just all about?
Yeah, great question. It goes back to where we started in the methodology journey. Getting that out on paper to help with designing an integration is what's going to really deliver value. It's going to help the entire team understand the process better, and the integration is now repeatable. It's not relying on one person to guide the process and work through things. So understanding how the work happens, if you have an SOP, using that SOP to guide how the integrations are built. But in our experience, a lot of times people don't have that written out, and it's living in their head, guiding how they interact day to day with their work. Larry, John, any comments?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to that, and I think it was Tim that posed that question. Great question, Tim. To be honest, it happens a ton. It is not the norm for many of our groups, many of our clients to have documented and standardized processes as it sits today, mainly because it is, inherent knowledge of one or two people that have been there a while, whatever the case is. So not saying that you need to document the process. That's something that I think we do as a collaborative fashion, understanding your requirements and what's that logic that is the acceptable happy path every time, and what are those exceptions. But then two, we can help guide you on what a standardized process should be. Is if you don't have that standardization, we can share those best practices, give you those recommendations of what we've done before, and allow that to be the starting point to guide the conversation. And then lastly, about your point of only one person really knows and how to solve those issues, I would say that probably is one of the biggest triggers that I've heard of when I talk to my customers, that if only one person knows, think about what happens when that one person is not there anymore. Is it, they retired? Is it something that they left to go to another job, whatever the case may be? And they take that knowledge with them. Can you rehire a single person to take their place? Are you hiring two or three? Usually the answer is more than one. So it's going to cost you more to replace them than it is to satisfy and standardize or translate that into an electronic world. Process world.
That's right, John.
Thanks, John. That was really good. David as well. Another question popped in. How do you match up packing slips to invoices? We don't want to pay an invoice unless we have a packing slip. Some of our supporting documents are handwritten. David, I'll pass this to you.
It's not an easy challenge. So thinking back to the example we talked about, the AP workflow, BOLs in a sense are packing slips. And occasionally there's handwritten information on them. For this particular workflow, we leverage an OCR technology to gather most of the data necessary off that BOL. But when there is an issue or something can't be read, that's when that surfaces an exception for the AP staff to step in, index it manually. And it goes back to the concept of clean workflow versus exceptions. So we're trying to compound value here with simplifications and efficiency gains bit by bit, because over time, every minute starts to add up, whether it's you doing it manually or having a integration handle the heavy lift for you.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Wes, good question. That is a situation that I think is a commonplace, not just with invoice processing, but also other business processes, things of that nature, to do that validation, those checks and balances to ensure that you not only have the items that you need, but they are accurate for that particular transaction. So in some cases, that is where we're aiding the ingestion, classification, and data extraction, doing the three-way match validation between the items that are required or not required, and trying to accomplish all that work before it ever gets to an end user. So in other words, if it's something that, shall we say, you require these three pieces of information, which is usually, an invoice, the receipt of delivery, and as applicable, a purchase order. If you don't have all three, it's not ready to go to an end user. So that can be a scenario where it can be a trigger awaiting their reaction. It can be something where you can set a timer where, hey, if I have not received validation or packing slip in 7 days, it fires off a note to someone to follow up with the vendor or whatever the case is. So that's where we bring in that rules, that logic, that automation of what would best align with your business rules and who needs to be notified to take action when appropriate. So.
Yeah, John, great job expanding on Wes's question. One thing that we often get asked is how do you handle exceptions and can the users manage them or can the integration? I think you expanded on the fact that depending on the business and its own logic, we always take that custom built approach to understanding what their needs are and defining the best way to create that exception path. So it's really good that you touched on that element. As I wait for another question to come in, I want to ask you, David, how do you prevent integrations from failing, causing users to revert back to their manual processes? And John, I know that you and Hyland experience these kind of dilemmas. If you both could touch on that, that'd be awesome.
Actually, I'm curious if we could wrap in Larry on this. He's the technical mastermind, and I know he's touched upon this in several discussions, but I think we've built a pretty good process. If Larry could touch on that, if he's available.
Yeah, let's pull him in here.
Hey, everyone. So the question was about losing trust in systems that are built, especially when hiccups or small little issues occur. And I think that starts with getting user buy-in in the discovery phase of a project. When you get the end user that's actually going to be working on that particular process involved in the beginning and they have voice, that actually enables the change management to occur, because a lot of times people will just want to revert back to doing it the old way when they see problems. They don't trust the integration, the systems. So once you get their feedback and they know that their feedback was part of the design process, that actually prevents a lot of that from happening on the back end.
A quick question, actually, Larry, follow up to this. With our integrations, there's obviously software updates and changes to code. How do we account for that when we're building integrations? Is it something that, what's our process there?
You got to test that the code changes with any update, whether it's to a software system or to APIs that you're connecting. You got to get ahead of it as soon as possible to test it. And by having documentation of how the system was built and what the requirements were to begin with, then that's how you could successfully test those changes that are coming down the line.
Okay. So it's a lot of logical approach and keeping track of how things are built, taking it one step at a time. Okay. Ben?
Still waiting on some questions here, but I'll throw one up while we fill in the space. So, what would be the benefit, I would say, of going with a custom built integration through, us like Savvy Source? And why wouldn't someone want to go through their own ecosystem and utilize the partnerships and relations they have, let's say a VAR that they're working with, trying to integrate their own ERP into the operational software they need? Could you speak on the value add as to why this methodology, this kind of approach has more benefit to that particular end user?
I'll take a stab at that. So I think
I was
there's
going to say, I could field it if you want, David. That's no big deal.
Well, so I'll start by saying this, it's not always custom integrations that, that we do. I think John put it best, not necessarily pre-built, but they're already existing. So there's scenarios that are common enough out there that, there's value in configuring it to just plug in the pieces. So the same applies for us. There's enough commonality across situations that, we have the building blocks in place, the framework, and when we engage, from situation to situation, we change the the type of siding for that framework, the way it looks, because there's enough nuance in the business that it requires that, but there's enough similarities that they can leverage the existing framework. In addition to that point, and this is where experience makes a difference. So a lot of people out there have the capabilities and capacity to build integrations, but they don't have experience with the edge cases and the unique business logic in certain industries. So that's where having an experienced partner makes a difference. Speed to execution. So just going beyond pre-built integrations, having that experience allows integration work to happen much quicker, much more robustly. It's that experience that really starts to speed up the process. Any other context you want to add, John?
Yeah. One thing I really wanted to add, and I figured I might need to because you wouldn't pat yourself on the back. Really working with a group like, Savvy Source is really the key metric that I think is valuable to a client in these processes. In your guys' world, you are comfortable, confident, and familiar with the customer's needs and processes overall. I'm looking at it from a Hyland perspective, whether that is, my AI tools or my content management, my integrations, whatever the case may be. Someone who works at Acumatica or Workday or SAP would view it from an ERP perspective, or, Cloud Command or whatever the case may be. So in other words, we have a mindset of everything's a nail, so I need to use my hammer. Whereas your team has that ability to take a step back and look at the totality of a customer's need and recognize what is the best tool to solve that problem and where in the process. So I think you're much better at ability to consult with a client and help them find the best path as opposed to squaring it into a particular platform.
Yep. Good point, John. Thank you. Appreciate the kudos. Ben, I'm going to hand it back to you here, but we're coming up on time here. So,
yeah, great. Yeah, I'll speak on this super quick here. As we wrap up today's webinar, once again, thank you, Larry, David, John, for sharing expertise and insights. Thank you, everyone who joined us. But we can't forget this point. We want you to reach out. These conversations don't end after a webinar. I'm sure you have tons of questions on how we can implement these practical ideas and improve the way information can move throughout your organization. So please feel free to scan that QR code on the left. But we also have more value add. We have an ebook structuring billing for scale that speaks about AR workflows. David, I'll pass that to you if you can speak on that resource.
Yeah, so for this webinar, we used an AP workflow to ground the conversation, but we've got several resources on our website that delve into how our methodology applies to AR workflows and why that works better. So you can ingest these at your leisure, consume them, understand them, and if you have questions, of course, reach out to us.
Great. Yeah, to all registered, we'll send you an email with a direct link to the webinar recording. Anything else you guys wanted to close out with? Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Well, that's it. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the time and hope you have a great afternoon.